Good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Welcome. My name is Joe Ferrara. I'm Vice President and Chief of Staff at Georgetown University, and I'm here today on behalf of President Jack DeGioia. And many of you probably know, but Jack, unfortunately, back in June, suffered a stroke. It was a pretty serious stroke. It was the kind where you have to have surgery as quickly as possible, and thank goodness it was terrible that he had a stroke, but the good news was it happened in a place where there were a lot of us around, and we were able to get him to a hospital very quickly. And it's one of those moments where every second and every minute counts. He's now going through rehabilitation and doing well, making progress, but the rehab process from one of these strokes is more of a marathon than a sprint. But we're doing everything we can to support him and his family, and I know he wishes he could be here. And I remember conversations with Jack and with John Borelli about this conference, so very glad that it's happening. But I wanted to welcome everybody here today to Dahlgren Chapel. Under President DeGioia, Jack's leadership, Georgetown has sought to foster opportunities for interfaith dialogue and engagement, and we're very grateful to have you all here for this most recent effort at dialogue and engagement. And particularly, we're privileged to have Archbishop Donald Bolin, Archbishop of the Catholic Archdiocese of Regina, Bishop Robert Innes, Anglican Bishop in Europe. They serve together as co-chairs of the International Anglican Roman Catholic Commission on Unity and Mission, or IARCM. Archbishop Bolin, it's wonderful to welcome you back to Georgetown after your time with us in 2020, in early 2020, right before the pandemic. We gathered at that time for a conference that was entitled Cardinal John Newman, an Anglican and Catholic Saint. We'll hear from both of our IARCM co-chairs in just a moment. We're delighted that you're all here at Georgetown. I also want to offer a special welcome to a few other people. Archbishop Samuel Enosa Penny, Archbishop of the Internal Province of Western Equatoria and Anglican Bishop of the Diocese of Yambio, South Sudan. Thank you. Bishop John Bauerschmidt, Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Tennessee. Bishop John Michael Botein, Bishop of the Romanian Greek Catholic Eparchy of St. George in Canton, Ohio. Thank you all for being here. And they're all here for this meeting of the Executive Committee of the IARCM. Let me also thank Reverend Dr. Ian Markham, President and Dean of Virginia Theological Seminary, VTS, for co-sponsoring this visit to Washington, D.C. with us. And I welcome the Reverend Dr. Kate Sonderegger, who is with us tonight, along with a few other colleagues from the Virginia theological community. Georgetown University is committed to ecumenical dialogue and to supporting the Holy See, especially the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity, in its work and particularly its sponsorship of this dialogue with the Anglican Communion. We welcome Benedictine Father Martin Brown from the Dicastery and Dr. Christopher Wells and Reverend Neil Vigers from the Anglican Communion. IARCM came into being over 20 years ago in 2001, and it was the result of a worldwide consultation between the Anglican Communion and the Holy See to serve as a companion dialogue to the already existing process that was underway, which is referred to as the Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission. That commission has been responsible for addressing what had been identified as dividing theological issues between Anglicans and Catholics. While some issues remain for further study, that commission identified much that Anglicans and Catholics agreed upon or could agree upon going forward. The task of the bishops here today, and all of the many Anglican and Catholic bishops who have joined them in ecumenical partnership through the work of IARCM, is to promote ways for Anglicans including members of the Episcopal Church in the United States, and Catholics to live fully the unity that they already share. They believe, as Pope Francis and Archbishop Justin Welby of Canterbury believe, as their predecessors have believed for the past 40 years, that Anglicans and Catholics have far more in common than what divides them. I want to thank Father Mark Bosco, who is our Vice President for Mission and Ministry at Georgetown, and all of our other colleagues in campus ministry for offering us Dahlgren Chapel, for us to hear from speakers this evening, and for supporting the success of the visit of our guests to Georgetown. So thank you again, and I now want to invite Dr. John Borelli, Special Assistant to the President, who will moderate our program this evening. So, John, thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Joe, as a Chief of Staff and Vice President, has been working very, very closely with the Provost in keeping the university going, and in particularly following the initiatives that President Jack DeGioia brought into reality during his period as president. Now, I invite our group of bishops up to the stage, to your places. Good. What's it? Not just yet. Sorry. Archbishop Donald Bolin, as Joe reminded us, is the Catholic Archbishop of Regina, Saskatchewan. He has been a friend of ours for over 20 years, from when he was appointed as staff to the Dicastery for Promoting Christian Unity. Now, that dicastery is the name today of the storied Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity that was responsible under Cardinal Bea and later Cardinal Willebrand's leadership of bringing Catholics into engagement with other Christians, with Jews, with people of other faiths, and with all for the betterment of humanity, reconciliation, support for religious liberty, and many ways of working together for social justice and the mission of the Church. Among Don's duties at the dicastery was the promotion of relations with the Anglican Communion. And he was there in 2001 to pick up the duties as staffing IARCM. Pretty soon he was co-secretary of IARCM. And when he finished up as his stint in the office, hoping to go back and finish that doctorate, as other heroes of the Secretariat in the past tried to do, but they gave their time to Christian unity, he was made a bishop. And Bishop Saskatoon, he's a native of Regina, and before long is Archbishop of Regina and co-chair of IARCM. So if anyone has lived and breathed IARCM, it's Don Bolin, and you are our first speaker.
I think if you introduce Robert, he's going to go first.
You want Robert to go first. Isn't that nice?
Sorry.
Oh, these ecumenical people. Anglican bishop in Europe, and he's the co-chair with Don. He was educated at St. John's College, Durham University, and then taught at the Anglican Seminary, Cranmer Hall in Durham as well, in a formation of seminarians in that great period following the council with all the excitement of an ecumenical project involving a Catholic seminary and a Methodist seminary as well. And in 2005, he was appointed Chancellor and Senior Chaplain of the Anglican Pro-Cathedral in Brussels. And so he was ordained a bishop in 2014 for the Church of England's institutions, its diocese in Europe. That diocese extends into Turkey, Morocco, Western Russia, and he remains in Brussels in doing his work and moving about Europe. His work before being assigned in Europe and definitely afterwards involved considerable ecumenical engagement. And this year now he has joined Archbishop Boland as co-chair of IARCM.
Thank you, John. Well, it's very good indeed to be with you all this evening, and thank you for coming and coming to an evening on ecumenism. I'm deeply grateful for the welcome that I and my Anglican colleagues have received here at this wonderful Jesuit university. IARCM is the sister body to IARCM, and as we've heard, and perhaps you already knew, it was born in the year 2000 when a meeting of Anglican and Roman Catholic bishops convened at Mississauga in Canada in the presence of the Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey, and the President of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, Cardinal Edward Cassidy. 13 pairs of bishops gathered from places across the globe where Anglican and Roman Catholic jurisdictions exist side by side. And this Mississauga conference led a year later to the creation of IARCM. And from the beginning, IARCM's aim was intended to be different from ARCIC. It was envisaged as a commission of bishops that would focus on the agreements discerned by ARCIC precisely in order to discern and draw out how those compel us towards joint witness and mission in the world. So IARCM was intended as a practical body, mission-focused. In 2007, IARCM issued a joint statement, this little book, Growing Together in Unity and Mission, building on 40 years of Anglican-Roman Catholic dialogue. It's really got two parts to it. The first part is a synthesis of the theological work of ARCIC under 7 headings. It sets out how far we've come in terms of theological agreement. The 7 headings briefly are belief in God as Trinity, Church as communion in mission, the living Word of God, baptism, Eucharist and ministry, authority in the Church, discipleship and holiness, and the Blessed Virgin Mary. And the second part presents a series of practical proposals drawing on this synthesis, visible expressions of our shared faith, joint study of our faith, cooperation in ministry, and shared witness in the world, a raft of practical proposals for action. In terms of then methodology and theology, IARCM, like ARCIC, proceeds from an understanding of the Church as communion, koinonia, this powerful theological understanding which has been so important in Roman Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox circles since Vatican II. IARCM assumes respect for one another and for the ecclesial being of each other's communities. It is non-adversarial. It is receptive to learning what is good in the other. We're focusing, as has already been said, in IARCM gatherings, not so much on where there are still points of difference, but on what we can do together on the basis of all those areas in which we do agree. What action does a communion that is real, albeit imperfect, yet enable? Certainly far more than we are currently doing. IARCM involves collaboration between representatives of ecclesial communities that have no authority over one another. The collaboration has to be willing, and it has to find its own way. No higher ecclesial authority is directing it overall. It is significant that from its beginning, IARCM has proceeded by bringing together pairs of bishops. We bishops, coming from similar places and contexts, we face similar issues and ministerial challenges, and so there is learning from one another. Our conversations don't proceed by stating articles of faith or propositions of truth. Still less do they have the intent of deconstructing opposing views. They proceed by a sense of the common discovery of truth. You could say that in our gatherings we are thinking and acting as if we were one in order to be one. I've been a participant on 2 IARCM pilgrimages, which have formed summit meetings for us, if you will. The first was from Canterbury to Rome in 2016, and the second from Rome to Canterbury in 2024. I think it is hard to overstate the ecumenical significance of these pilgrimages and the formative value of them for those of us who have taken part. Let me say something about the experience. The format of a pilgrimage means moving from place to place for different acts of worship and prayers. We shared in the daily offices of morning and evening prayer and the Eucharist. Even though we were not able to receive the Eucharist together, we were blessed and enriched through each other's devotion, through shared spiritual traditions and liturgical life. We rejoiced in our shared confession of the creeds, our joint intercessions, our confession of one baptism. Sometimes our worship has pushed the boundaries of what has previously been permitted. For example, an Anglican Vespers in St. Peter's, Rome, or a Eucharistic celebration in a Roman church conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury. This kind of spiritual ecumenism is a way in which we act as if we are one in order that we can be one. Most of the time in our gatherings, bishops are wearing informal dress. And so in plenary discussions, it's virtually impossible to tell who is Roman Catholic and who is Anglican. Certainly, the theological differences are far less significant than the regional and cultural differences. To me, a European, what is significant about a conversation with 2 bishops from Papua New Guinea is their distinctive appearance, very different from mine, and their lived experience of ministry in Oceania. It wouldn't be easy at all for me to tell which of them was the Roman Catholic and which of them was the Anglican. I remember on our first pilgrimage, the first time our clergy, our bishops, put on their robes for Eucharist, I was quite startled to discover who was who. On our second pilgrimage, we were made more explicitly conscious of an ecumenism of martyrdom. There is something particularly significant and poignant about praying together in places that are of deep historical significance associated with martyrs of the faith. Our pilgrimage took us from the tombs of the martyrs Peter and Paul to the shrine of Thomas Becket in Canterbury by way of the martyrs commemorated in the church of San Bartolomeo on Tiber Island. We realized that to appreciate the martyrs of another Christian tradition is inevitably to grow in respect for that tradition. We were reminded that the 20th century was, above all, the century of martyrdom. And we surfaced explicitly, too, the realization that amongst our own number, there were bishops ministering in situations of danger, conflict, and war. On both of our pilgrimages, one of the highlights was without doubt the commissioning ceremony. On the first pilgrimage in 2016, we gathered at San Gregorio on the Caelian Hill, from where Gregory sent out Augustine in mission to the English peoples. Pairs of Catholic and Anglican bishops were commissioned jointly by Pope Francis and Archbishop Welby to go out in mission. My pair was the Flemish Bishop of Antwerp, Johan Bonny, who has remained a good friend and colleague. Introducing the commissioning event in 2016, the Pope said to us, 14 centuries ago, Pope Gregory sent the servant of God Augustine, first Archbishop of Canterbury, and his companions from this holy place to preach the joyful message of the Word of God. Today, we send you, dear brothers, servants of God, with this same joyful message of his everlasting kingdom. As our Lord sent out his disciples in pairs, will you be true pilgrim companions to one another in this missionary journey? Well, I can tell you that was one of the most spiritually moving events of my life and my Christian ministry. How extraordinary, isn't it, that the Pope and the Archbishop of Canterbury could commission pairs of bishops in mission in that way. It would have been unthinkable 50 years ago. How much progress we've made. At the end of that service, Pope Francis presented Archbishop Justin with a replica of St. Gregory's staff. Archbishop Welby took a pectoral cross from around his neck and gave it as a gift to Pope Francis, who kissed it and put it on. And this kind of exchange of gifts is another powerful symbolic way in which ecumenical friendship is demonstrated and developed. The right symbolic action, carefully and imaginatively constructed and portrayed, can in a visual age speak louder than many words. The commissioning was repeated in 2024, this time in the much bigger and more public context of St. Paul's outside the walls, the place where St. Paul was buried and one of the four main basilicas in Rome. The context was the main service for the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity, and we were commissioned in front of numerous Catholic cardinals and Eastern Orthodox hierarchs. Archbishop Justin was remarkably invited to give an impromptu homily, and I was aware that one, at least, of the Anglican bishops commissioned was female. So powerful commissioning events. And then the question of how to do mission together as bishops. This is easier in some contexts and parts of the world than others. Much depends on the proximity of the pairs of bishops to each other, the extent of their pastoral responsibilities, and the degree to which their jurisdictions overlap. One example of shared mission in England is the Together for the Common Good initiative that was inspired by the partnership of the Catholic Archbishop Derek Warlock and the Anglican Bishop of Liverpool, David Shepherd. Together for the Common Good brings together church networks, academics, theologians, policymakers, members of Parliament in the cause of civic and spiritual renewal. In Belgium, where I live, Catholics, Anglicans, and other denominations actually are inspired by an initiative of the Sant'Egidio community to provide humanitarian corridors for families fleeing conflict zones. The Belgian government will allow families to migrate if churches guarantee to support them financially and morally. And one of the most moving experiences that I've had for a long time was to be at our national airport to greet a Muslim Syrian family escaping the civil war, simply overjoyed to be arriving in a friendly, peaceful country and a welcoming church. To conclude, we believe that Jesus Christ was in the world, reconciling the world to himself, and he commissions us to be ambassadors of reconciliation. And for me, I've come to see in my ministry that reconciliation is at the very core of what I'm about. Reconciliation is the embodiment of the gospel. It must start with the church, and it must spill over into the world. IARCM has its own role to play in the bigger project of reconciliation, but the scale of the task is enormous. When we look back over Christian history, our divisions are terrifyingly bad. And in some places, they still are. I look after a small Anglican congregation in Ukraine. In that country, Orthodox Christians are bitterly divided from one another with dreadful consequences. IARCM, along with its sister body, ARCIC, is committed to building unity. ARCIC is entrusted with the hard theological work of reconciling theological differences. We have the joyful and positive task of encouraging Anglicans and Catholics to pray, work, learn, and go out together in mission on the basis of the many things upon which we agree. Spiritual ecumenism, the ecumenism of martyrs, the ecumenism of action and mission, acting as if we were one that we might become one. And when we do that, it is sometimes the case that we discover our remaining theological divides can begin to recede in significance and may turn out to be more susceptible to imaginative resolution than we had previously supposed. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Bishop Robert, and thank you all for the wonderful welcome that we have received here at Georgetown. I'm going to cover a little bit of the same territory, but I want to map out on a large scale some of the more basic questions that we start with. Why do we pursue unity with one another? And how do we do so? And what's our specific role? And in that, I want to ask what your specific role is as Georgetown University, and likewise Virginia Theological Seminary. Christ desires that his disciples be one. It's a prayer that Jesus lifts before the Father before he dies. It's at the heart of what his whole mission was, to bring his disciples into unity so that the world would believe. The Second Vatican Council really launched the Catholic Church into the ecumenical movement, and as it did so, it indicated that every person and every institution within the church had a role in building up Christian unity. All were involved. It was the inspiration of Pope John XXIII to identify the pursuit of unity as one of the goals of the Council, but it was Pope Paul VI, who succeeded him in 1963, who really introduced into the vocabulary of the Catholic world the word dialogue. His document, his encyclical from 1964, Ecclesiam Suum, uses the word dialogue over 60 times. Since then, successive popes have identified dialogue as the path that the Catholic Church is to use and to engage in order to build up and bring about reconciliation. Now, at the Second Vatican Council's decree on ecumenism, which came out in 1964, it identified the work of entering into dialogue with other families of churches, and to do that on an international level and to do that on a national level. So John, with Sam's help, has spent much of their lives working at building dialogues with other Christian churches here in the United States, and some interfaith work with other religious traditions as well. At the Vatican, as John said, the Pontifical Council, now Dicastery for Christian Unity, has that job. It coordinates dialogues. Bishop Roberts already introduced the work of ARCIC, the theological dialogue, and what a theological dialogue, a bilateral theological dialogue, tries to do is to identify the breadth and width of what we hold in common. And then it zeroes in on those areas of difference. And for Anglicans and Roman Catholics, Episcopalians and Roman Catholics, those areas of difference are not that great. They sometimes feel great, but vis-a-vis all that we hold in common, they are fairly narrow areas. So the dialogue tries to chart out all that we hold in common and to identify the biblical, the patristic foundations for that. It also zeroes in then on those areas of difference, and it tries to unpack them. Sometimes it identifies areas of difference where there are different emphases, but these emphases are not communion dividing. Sometimes it identifies differences which remain, but they shouldn't be communion dividing. And sometimes there are differences which are solidly entrenched and which really do keep us apart. But ours, when we work on those, and when we work on them together in the context of dialogue, we're able to identify at least some common biblical foundations, some common elements in that pursuit of faithfulness to God, and we recognize those in each other. Now, the bilateral dialogues that the Church has sponsored and encouraged over the past decades have accomplished so much, but they also have limits. They weren't able to bring about transformation in our churches. Documents seldom do that. So it was in 1996, at a really difficult moment in Anglican-Roman Catholic relations, the Archbishop of Canterbury and Pope met. It was clear that the ordination of women to priesthood and episcopate was not something that we were going to find an easy way forward. And they had to make a decision. Are we going to reduce in priority this dialogue, or are we going to find a new way forward? They made the courageous decision to pursue new ways forward, which would focus on doing everything we could together. That was the background to that gathering at Mississauga in 2000. And that was the meeting, which bringing 13 pairs of bishops together from different parts of the world really opened up a methodology that led to the establishment of IARCM. When bishops from different parts of the world, Anglican and Roman Catholic, get together, when they share their common experiences, when they were immersed in the theological dialogue and all it had accomplished, and then were asked, therefore, what can you do together? What should you be doing together? Cardinal Kasper said it was the best meeting he had attended in his whole life. That gave rise to the establishment of IARCM. It's a commission which is really tasked with understanding what we hold together theologically and doing something about it. There's a principle in the ecumenical world, endorsed by Anglicans and Roman Catholics alike, but comes from the faith and order tradition, called the Lund principle, from Lund, Sweden, in a meeting in 1952. Christian churches should do all things together, except where deep differences require that we act separately. We don't do that. We act separately except where extraordinary circumstances force us to act together. It's IARCM's mission, and every dialogue should have a wing that has that mission, right? To bridge that gap between all that we hold in common and what we do together in our faith, in our witness, in our mission, in our prayer life. So that's the task that IARCM has. And it identified a particular role for bishops in this regard. Bishops aren't the only ones that have responsibility to foster Christian unity. Theological colleges at Catholic universities, for instance, such as Georgetown, have responsibilities in the pursuit of Christian unity as well. And you're hosting this conference is a fulfilling of that responsibility. Your professors studying these documents that we produce is an engaging in that ecumenical work. You're building ties with other Christian communities and other faith communities is important work in the work of reconciliation. But for bishops, for us bishops, what we learned through that Mississauga meeting was by bringing bishops together and identifying a pair of bishops from each country where we live in significant numbers side by side, special things happened. We start those meetings with each pair of bishops sharing something with the rest of those gathered about their own particular context and experience. There are 4 elements of these summits that Bishop Robert spoke about, the most recent one in January of this year. 4 elements. The first element is that we come in pairs. We're doing this together. We're building relationships between pairs of bishops, and we go back and we try to communicate in our own countries the value and importance of building pairs, building relationships with each other. On the level of bishops, a certain level of possibility arises, but that happens when theological colleges cooperate, when priests and ministers in their regional or in their parish communities start to get to know each other. Second element is prayer. And these summits are really very special pilgrimages. We get to pray, in T.S. Eliot's words, in places where prayer has been valid. We get to pray at the place where St. Pope Gregory sent off St. Augustine of Canterbury to England in 597. We get to pray at St. Peter's Basilica and St. Paul outside the walls where Peter and Paul are buried, and we get to pray in Canterbury Cathedral with its rich history, and we prayed together at the tomb of Thomas à Becket. We are able to make this a spiritual pilgrimage together, which deepens the bonds between us. Thirdly, we look at themes where we think bishops can work together. So we picked out 4 themes for this most recent meeting: the theme of synodality, walking together; the theme of how we exercise authority in the church; the theme of pursuit of justice in terms of environment, in terms of relations with Indigenous, various other; and the theme of safeguarding and dealing with the legacy of clergy sexual abuse and how we can help each other and support each other in that work. In each instance, we get some very good speakers to come in and address those topics. And in each instance, we ask bishops to think about what they can do in their own context together in that particular area. The fourth area that is part of this gathering is this commissioning. And Bishop Robert read to you from the commissioning in 2016. We were commissioned as well in 2024. It is a really powerful experience. It's an interesting thing to compare Archic and IARCM, as I conclude here. Archic hives away, it brings its theologians together, and they work very hard. They eat together, they drink scotch together, they pray together, right? But it's pretty much a private context where they do that rigorous theological work. We get to go to Rome and to Canterbury to celebrate with the Pope and the Archbishop of Canterbury and to really be sent forth together. And that sending forth isn't just meant for bishops, it's meant for our two communions. It's meant to filter down so that you here in Georgetown and everywhere else in the world see that commissioning, that sending forth to do together whatever you faithfully and appropriately can. So I'm going to leave it at that, and you're going to now hear, after John introduces them, from the American pair who attended that summit. Thank you.
I'd like you all to note for the record that Archbishop Boland in Canada referred to the American pair. I was going to say United States, but I'll stay with the American pair. Let me introduce the pair who represented the United States at the most recent commissioning in Rome this past January, on prayer for Christian unity. Bishop John Bauerschmidt is the 11th Bishop of Tennessee, Episcopal Diocese of Tennessee, as Joe indicated. He graduated from Kenyon College and continued his studies at General Theological Seminary in New York, an institution with a great history in the Episcopal Church, and then went on to Oxford University, where he wrote a doctoral thesis on the work of St. Augustine. His work in Tennessee has been one of reconciliation and healing. We know Catholics are quite divided, are polarized, and so are Episcopalians in the United States. And that's been a big part of his work in Tennessee. He is past chair of the board of the Episcopal Church's publication, The Living Church. And we have the editor here who's staffing this group, Christopher Wells, who is editor of The Living Church, and helped move it into a kind of global impact. That's very before being promoted to the Anglican Communion Office, I suppose. Bishop Bauerschmidt is very much a supporter of the mission of IARCM and its methodology. And his Catholic counterpart is Bishop John Michael Botein, who is the bishop of the Romanian Greek Catholic Eparchy of St. George in Canton, Ohio, the city of Father John Michael's birth. In fact, his diocese or eparchy of the Romanian Greek Catholic Church is the only one of its kind outside of Romania. For those of you who don't know, the Catholic Church is really a communion of about 25 different churches and communities. We all know the Roman or the Latin Catholic Church, but there are about 23 Eastern Catholic churches that follow the rites and order of Eastern churches, the community of Eastern churches of various forms. As bishop of his eparchy, he's also a member of the Holy Synod of the Greek Catholic Church of Romania, and very much a strong supporter of humanism. And his presence among these pairs of bishops reminds everyone of the diversity of the Catholic Church. So, our U.S. pair.
Right, thank you. We've heard a little bit about IARCM and the work of the pilgrimages and summits. It was my pleasure to be a part of the 2016 pilgrimage as well as the 2024 pilgrimage. And in 2024, my pair was John Michael Botine. But our backstory for that is that we are co-chairs of the Anglican Roman Catholic Dialogue USA. And so that is the dialogue sponsored by the Episcopal Church and the USCCB. So we have this long-running dialogue that traces back to the late 60s, early 70s, and all of the good work of this bilateral theological dialogue is all collected on the internet, so you can see what our theologians and pastors have been doing in the cause of the reconciliation of our two churches. It's all on the website, so I refer you to that. I also want to say, just that I joined as Episcopal co-chair in 2010, and during that time that I've been involved with ARC USA, we have brought out agreed statements on ecclesiology and moral discernment, a rich reflection, and then most recently, not quite yet released, we're in the last little stages of getting this document out, but a major document on reconciliation conceived on multiple levels, not just ecclesial reconciliation, but also the broader context of human reconciliation, reconciliation with the environment, reconciliation between social reconciliation, racial reconciliation, and so forth. So it's a rich topic, and our theologians dealt with it very, very gracefully and well. So that's soon to come out. So what we do in this bilateral theological dialogue is we as Episcopal co-chairs, we sort of ride a herd over academic theologians, and with the sprinkling of pastors as well, both lay and ordained academic theologians who are working on a particular subject, whether it's moral discernment and ecclesiology or on reconciliation. And the conversations are really rich, and in fact, it's easy to forget who's a Roman Catholic representative and who's a representative from the Episcopal Church in these conversations. The Academy has its own way and its own pecking order, and mostly we're just sort of scratching our heads because neither one of us are academics. We're bishops for our sins. So there we go. Maybe just a personal recollection here. How do you get involved in ecumenical work? Well, since 2010, I've been involved in it in this way, but my interest in ecumenism goes back to at least the 1990s, when I was ecumenical officer for the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina for several years, and enjoyed that work. But then also, even if you go back yet another decade, our family is an ecumenical project, Anglican and Roman Catholic, and so it's not just an interesting academic exercise or theoretical, but it's kind of lived. I suppose most Americans are part of such ecumenical projects. So, but this one's close to home for me, and so I'm glad to be able to work on this in this way. Maybe just a word of encouragement to the next generation of ecumenists. This is long-term work when it comes to Anglican Roman Catholic theological conversation and lived experience, living into the communion that we share already as baptized people. This is going to be a long-term project, and there is a need for the next generation of ecumenists to come forward, because the need for this is not going to go away. And if you think about a subject like reconciliation, when we embraced this topic in 2014 as ArkUSA, we had no idea how timely it would become in the life of our nation. We were a little prescient, I think, in already anticipating the need. So the need for the next generation of ecumenists is already there, and I'm hoping there's some of them, that next generation right here in this room. Now, it is my pleasure to turn the mic over to my colleague, John Michael Botine, and for his reflection.
My name is John Michael, and I'm a bishop. You're supposed to say, "Hi, John Michael." But actually, that echoes something that I had the privilege of saying we still call it Constantinople, a few years back, within the presence of Patriarch Bartholomew, when I said, "My name is John Michael, and I'm a uniat." And those who know that that's a term of opprobrium. It's a negative term that typically Orthodox and Roman Catholics apply to us. And the question is, I'm Catholic, I'm part of the Catholic Church, my church is a part of the Catholic Church, but why is there a Greek Catholic in the Anglican-Roman Catholic dialogue? And the answer is, I don't know. What happened was I was grabbed by two people from the Bishops' Committee on the Secretariat on Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, and asked to do this. And I said, I am too young. I have no idea. I don't know the Anglican Church. And they said not to worry. You let the theologians do the theologizing. Your job is relationship. And I think that I was asked by these two people because they knew what I had been doing for a number of years, almost a couple dozen years, thanks to my good friend Jack Fiegel over there, being involved in unofficial but grassroots ecumenism with Catholics and Orthodox, Roman Catholics, Greek Catholics, and Orthodox. And we were not a gathering of theologians particularly. We had speakers who were theologians, not a gathering of hierarchs or clergy even. It was a gathering of folks, people, who came together because they were interested in the unity of the church. And so I think because these gentlemen had seen what I was doing with that, they thought maybe I had something to offer. I don't know. I still don't know. But what I know is that an experience like what we had in Rome and Canterbury is an inspiration. It's a sparking of something. And you don't know where that's going to go, just like when you say yes to something that you've been asked to do that you have no expertise in. You don't know where it's going to go. For me, it's gone to an awesome place where I've gotten to know the Anglican Communion, Anglicans, Episcopalians, and those from around the world now because of the IARCM Summit or pilgrimage, and the awesome experiences we had both in Rome and Canterbury. And one of the things that stuck out for me, and I think it stuck out probably for all of us who were there, all the bishops who were there, is that this is a mission for the 21st century. And our document that we're working on the Call to Reconciliation, is a document for the 21st century because it recognizes that it is perhaps the unique calling of the followers of Christ to do the reconciling, or to lead the way in reconciling and bringing the world to God, at least bringing the world away from the throats of each other, if at all possible. Because my involvement has also been in the peace movement in many ways, too. And so I bring that perspective as well, and I want to make sure that there's a kind of a focus on the fact that what we're doing is the mission of the Christian community in the world today. Especially in a world as divided, as polarized as it is, ecumenism is, in our document we say, is the school for reconciliation. Ecumenism is the school for reconciliation. So what we're doing in terms of the churches enables us to go out of our ecclesial context to do the reconciling work that Jesus Christ himself came to do as members of the body of Christ. One of the things about this document that's, I think, kind of a new insight is that reconciliation can't be done along the model of, say, Reconstruction in this country after the Civil War, or what's done in the name of reconciliation in a lot of other contexts. But it has to begin with recognizing the pain, the hurt, recognizing the damage. So recognition is the first step of it. And the second step of it is repair. There has to be repair of the damage that's done. And then the third step is restoration. Georgetown is, in a famous way, kind of leading the way in carrying that out. And so it is a privilege for me in a spiritual way to be here to say these words. But it spills out. The spirit of IARCM has spilled out. You know, it's been a real pleasure to get to know Bishop John. And as a result of I'm pretty sure, as a result of our experience over in Europe, the Bishop John and I are also going to be presenters at the Orientale Lumen Conference coming up, which is the Orthodox Catholic, Eastern Catholic, and Roman Catholic conference that Jack Fiegel has been running for 29 years. And this year, it's supposed to be, and if all goes well, it's going to be at Virginia Theological Seminary. So our work in ecumenism as Anglicans and Catholics, our work in ecumenism as Orthodox and Catholics is starting to overlap. And I think that's an important thing, because I think Bishop John and I are going to be able to bring that spark from Rome and from Canterbury to ignite a little bit of what's going on in that domain as well. So, by your prayers and your support, we will do just that. We have been asked by Pope Francis and Archbishop Justin Welby to do that, and do that we will. And we'll remain a pair as long as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So you get a little flavor of the pairing and cooperation and the importance of that role. From the start of our planning for this meeting here, the members of IARCM were insistent we've got to get a pair of bishops from a different, distant cultural, regional setting who are known for their great cooperation and for the overwhelmingly significant role that they are playing. And we were successful in that, partially. We have Archbishop Samuel Enosa Penny with us, who is a provincial, as Joe introduced him. He is the Archbishop of a province of the Anglican Communion and serves as a bishop of a diocese. And the Church of Sudan, the Episcopal Church of Sudan, was organized in 1899, and his father is a canon in the Episcopal Church of Sudan. Enosa Penny is actually now of the Church of South Sudan, senior clergy. And I'm sure you're aware that Archbishop Penny faces many challenges in his work, dealing with the impact of war, poverty, displacement on the people of South Sudan. I think almost nightly we get some report from South Sudan in the news. We were hoping his Catholic partner, the Bishop Alex Sarkor, could be with us today, but it was very difficult to procure a visa in Sudan, South Sudan. They had to travel. Archbishop Penny was successful. He went to Nairobi. Bishop Sarkor was not successful. So we miss him. Let me just add that Archbishop Penny studied at Carlisle College and Church Army, Nairobi in Kenya. He has a postgraduate diploma in peace building and one in ecumenism from Boissy, the Ecumenical Institute in Geneva, Switzerland. He obtained from both the University of Dubuque and Wartburg Theological Seminary, which is a Lutheran seminary in Iowa, a Master's of Theology. And they've invited him back to honor him with an honorary doctorate. And his focus was on community development and missiology. So we're waiting to hear from you, Archbishop Penny.
I bring you greetings from your brothers and sisters in both the Anglican Church, which is the Episcopal Church in South Sudan, as well as the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, as they call it. I also bring you special greetings from my pair, who is the Catholic Bishop of the Diocese of Yei, Bishop Alex, who was unable to get visa because we were planning that we could go to obtain our visas in the American Embassy in Uganda, but they asked us to come next year for the visa interview. So we had to change to go to Nairobi, and Bishop Alex was not able to make it to Nairobi. But I bring you his greetings. Before I talk about our work, I would like to set the context in which we work. South Sudan is the newest country in the world. To get to that, it has been a long process. Many civil wars, many peace agreements, some honored, some not honored. But we thank God, after many years, maybe over 7 decades of civil wars, we attained this new nation, which we think is a gift from God and support from our brothers and sisters from around the world, and especially the ecumenical, led by AACC, which is All African Conference of Churches, WCC, World Council of Churches, together with the Ecumenical Council, which we used to have South Sudan Council of Churches, but now we call it South Sudan Council of Churches. It has been a series of many civil wars, 1955, right at the time we got our independence, to 1972. We had relative peace for 10 years, 73 to 83. Another long civil war from 83 to 2005, which was 21 years. We had 6 years of interim period where we voted for our referendum. And then when we got our independence in 2011, we all rejoiced. We thought, finally we have arrived where we wanted to. Less did we know that in only 2 years, we will go into even serious fighting, which is now inside, where we were fighting with our neighbors, one tribe against the next tribe, which was really a sad history for us. And that is the point where the church, which has been the only infrastructure throughout this breakdown of civil wars, almost broke. The one thing I want to assure you is that through all these civil wars, it has been the church which has been the only infrastructure which has remained persistent, which have remained united, and which have led to all those peace talks you hear about. We call ourselves the church because we see ourselves as one. Both the Catholic and the Anglicans, we are the majority in the country. In a country where we have about 12 million people, about 5 million are Catholics, and 5 million are Anglicans, and then the rest belong to the smaller denominations which are there. Through all this time, our work, we have drawn together closely. We share the ecumenism at all levels, from the provincial, diocesan, and to the local parish. Our churches, if a bishop is coming, they don't differentiate. A bishop from the Catholic, a bishop from the Episcopal, they all go together. The people in the village will all turn up to go for this church service. When an Episcopal bishop turns, the same. The Catholic, the same. And they join themselves, even to do prayers and fasting. We do retreats together, especially when we want to pray for peace and when we have a common thing we are asking God for. We can also build our churches together locally. These are testimonies that help. We share pulpits, we visit one another regularly, and that is our strength. And that is always what we want to live for and we want to do. We see that unity of the church, because we use the same Bible, is power. It is strength. Because we believe that there is no heaven we believe the heaven for the Catholics or for the Episcopalians are different. It is just one heaven where we are all going, and we have one Jesus Christ, one God, one faith, and we share in the same creed. So we don't see much difference apart from the minor things that are there. So because of this, that is why we have this strong belief. A bishop cannot be consecrated without his counterpart from the other side present. That is always a Catholic bishop or an Anglican bishop, we have to share, we have to be there in person. And this is what we have inherited, and this is what we want to continue to cherish, and our people like it. I'm thinking to share 2 stories in a very short way, and the 2 stories will demonstrate how deep our relationship goes. The first story happened in 1993. In 1993, our second bishop, I'm the 4th bishop of Yambio, our second bishop of Yambio was away out of the country, and the civil war had reached our town, and it was captured by the SPLA. His family was there, and they have to escape 350 miles to Central African Republic, where they went for refuge. But the Catholic bishop remained at home. He remained in the liberated areas for all those, for 91, 92, and 93. In our constitution, a bishop cannot be away from his diocese for 90 days. And here it is 3 years. It is war. We were trying to figure out. And the commissary at that particular time, who was sitting on behalf of the bishop, chairing the meetings, he had to join his brothers from Sudan, from the north, outside the country, because we couldn't meet inside the country because of the war. Those in the war areas, in the government-controlled areas, have to meet either in Uganda or in Nairobi. In this particular meeting in 1993 in Nairobi, there was a need for the commissary to become the bishop. He presented himself to his other colleagues, to the other bishops, that they need to make him bishop. And when this discussion was going on, the Catholic bishop was also in Nairobi for their Catholic conference, bishops' conference, and he heard this, and this pained him, and he didn't know what to do. This is what he did. He flew to Yambio, And he told his driver right in the airport that tomorrow morning, the driver should set the car ready to go 350 miles on those very good roads, I think, which you can imagine, covering 350 miles to Central African Republic. And they left 6 a.m. They were able to get there 11 p.m. And he went straight to where the Episcopal bishop was staying. And they came to him and they said, my brother, I have come for you. I have come to take you with me to Yambio. Unless you have abandoned the sheep in Yambio, then someone else will become the shepherd. And in the morning at 6 a.m., you have to make up your mind. I will pass by to see if he will go with you. He made up his mind, and in the morning at 6 a.m., when the Catholic bishop arrived, he was ready to go. They went. Nobody knew. There were no phones, no messages leaked. And that very night in Yambio, the standing committee was being convened, and it was already 9 p.m., and the last agenda was confirmation of the new bishop to be consecrated on Sunday. Before they reached there was a light coming and a car coming at night to the cathedral, which we will be celebrating 100 years next year in April. All of a sudden, they saw the bishop coming. Everybody stood up, and that was the end of the story. The question which is still not being discussed publicly is, where are those vestments which were bought for this consecration? We don't know where it is, but that bishop, after he retired, died recently. When he died, I was the bishop then, the bishop of Yambio now. And all Anglicans, Episcopalians, came for his funeral. And I have to say something there. It was quite difficult. It was quite difficult. What do I say? I cannot talk, and everybody is there, without thanking the dead bishop for his deep relationship, saving ECS, the Episcopal Church, from crisis, because he saved crisis, because this could have been two bishops in the same diocese. So this is just one story to tell you how deep we are, how we work together. The last thing I want to ask is prayers. Continue to pray for us, because the country is not moving in the right direction yet. The extension of the agreement that there should be election is not being done. When they give 2 years, when the 2 years are over, they will say, oh, we need another 2 years. We need another 2 years. Now it is 6 times. There has been no election. So pray for us that we can be able to stood our ground as the church to wake our government, to do work on the constitution, permanent constitution, to do the census, and also to do the election. May God bless you as you pray for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Archbishop Samuel Penny. Indeed, quite a different world where Anglicans and Catholics are of equal numbers to begin with, and the infrastructure is the church. And the Archbishop was telling me in an early conversation, the religious leaders are far more important than the political leaders right now in South Sudan. So that is a very different cultural and religious setting where Anglicans and Catholics find themselves. We have time for questions, inquiries, comments? And please keep your question to a question. How about that? Yes, Joe.
I was struck by Bishop Botein's. I was struck by Bishop Botein's construct of recognition, repair, and restoration. In our work here at Georgetown and what we call our Slavery Memory and Reconciliation Initiative, two analogous constructs. One that we talk about here is acknowledgement, apology, and action. And another one in our work with one of our partners, the Kellogg Foundation, truth, racial healing, and transformation. And I wonder if you could comment, one thing we have learned in that process, we're one of the few universities engaged in this where we have identified thousands of living descendants of the ancestors who were enslaved. And so we're having real conversations. These aren't abstract discussions of slavery 200 or 300 years ago. We are talking to the living descendants. And one thing that has struck me is, first of all, it is a process that takes a lot of time. And even in those early phases, before you get to transformation, before you get to restoration, the time that has to go into even those early phases of recognition and healing and acknowledgement. And I wonder if you just, Bishop Botein or any of you, might comment on that. I know there was one comment made about the future generations. We need the next generation to come forward. And we think about that a lot at Georgetown. This is ongoing work. And I just wondered if you might talk a little bit about the time dimension of this and the dedication and how do you bring along that next generation to continue this work. So thank you.
That construct that you were talking about is actually in the document itself, and I think we took a long time to write the document, and as Bishop John said, riding herd, if you will, on some theologians who you really, when you start thinking about what you have to repent of, it's hard to stop. It's hard to stop. And so, starting with racial reconciliation, reconciliation with the Jewish community, with the Islamic community, reconciliation with the planet, reconciliation in so many different ways, it's a long document, But I think the point of it is, this is the mission for the church in the 21st century. And this is what we must be engaged in for the long haul. And it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be time-consuming, and it's going to take sacrifice. But the encouragement is that this is what we are asked to do by the creator of the universe. So.
Yes, David. Joe Farrar asked the first question, who welcomed everyone. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Father David Hollenbach. I teach here at Georgetown University, both in the School of Foreign Service and also in the Department of Theology, and I'm affiliated with the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. And one of the things that struck me in hearing your comments, all of the bishops really, was that the work that you're doing in your dialogues strikes me as being very analogous to, in the early days of the ecumenical movement, the so-called life and work movement, which was being distinguished from the faith and order movement, which I gather the ARSIC initiatives and Anglican and Roman Catholic dialogue of a more doctrinal sort sounds to me like it's somewhat more analogous to what has become the faith and order movement, whereas what you're doing sounds like something similar to what the life and work movement in the early days of ecumenism was doing, of a more practical nature. Am I correct in that regard? And if so, does this have analogies in the broader ecumenical sphere as it did in the early days of ecumenism being founded in the Protestant communities largely?
I'll jump in first. Thank you very much for the question. I think IARCM tries to bridge those two movements, right? Its basis is the faith and order work, the theological dialogue work that's been done by ARCIC. And so that's our starting point. We start with the recognition that we have agreement, substantial agreement on Eucharist and ministry. We have significant convergences on authority, complete agreement on salvation in the church. We've done that work, and so our starting point is that body of research which is identified, let me put it this way, the shape of the real but incomplete communion that binds us together. And then we do the life and work piece. We ask that question. In light of everything that we hold together, what should we be doing together? So it is the life and work piece, but it's not separate from, or I would say dismissive of, the faith and order work. It rather bridges it. We laugh about the acronym IARCM, which is not an elegant acronym, but when the body was founded, we explored different possibilities. They agreed it has to be the Commission for Unity and Mission, which is precisely bridging of those two bodies.
And I understood you were saying that you were founded because of the failure to get agreement about women's roles in ministry and ordination. And that would mean that the faith and order component was not strong, and it led to the I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah, I'll just keep going briefly. I don't want to take the mic from my brothers. I mean, it was a recognition by the Archbishop of Canterbury, at that time George Carey, and Pope John Paul II, that they had accomplished so much in the theological dialogue, and that could not be lost because there was one particular roadblock which kept us from taking a full step towards unity. So it acknowledged the remaining disagreements, but it was really, we must move forward as communions because of the breadth of what we hold together. So it really is meant to be a commission that bridges those two fields of ecumenical engagement. Thanks for an excellent question.
Anyone else want to comment?
Well,
Bishop Ennis?
I'd just say that growing together in unity and mission, it's in two parts, but the larger of the two parts is theological, exploring and summarizing ARCIC's conclusions and setting out the areas, the 7 areas of major agreement and where there remains work to be done. And so the practical section draws directly from the theology, and we are, in our discussions, are consciously aware of where we stand theologically, and we are wanting to provide a context for ARCIC to do its work, in fact, too.
So if, using the program, if you search IARCM or you search Growing Together in Unity and Mission, you'll find your way to either the website of the Dicastery for Christian Unity or to the Anglican Communion website, and you'll find these reports that you can download that are available to you.
Or to the website iarcm.org.
Or to its own website. Okay. But there is a difference. And when we began all of this in the late 60s, we needed to identify where we were having agreements and where we had real disagreements. And that took time. And we uncovered some further disagreements as we resolved some differences. But it strikes me that the people in South Sudan had faith that there was that agreement that took time to identify by theologians. You had it in faith. And the way you function in pairs of bishops and in the community, it seems that there's a great deal of faith in the people that, there's a lot we share and we need to work as one church. Is that very different? I see a hand up there. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Larry Goldman. I'm the director of the Washington Theological Consortium, 10 different theological schools and seminaries from different traditions in the region. We have a deep commitment to expose students to each other's campuses and traditions and builds ecumenical friendships and knowledge. We have some formal ways of doing that through a certificate program as well. But I am struck by how unsexy ecumenism is to these students. You know, it's interfaith stuff is really has more pizzazz. So my question for you is, how have local clergy and laity especially kind of caught the ecumenical spirit, or the bug, as I say, in your pairing and in your mission going outwards? Clearly in Sudan, the on-the-ground work is in place, but I'm curious, how do they kind of catch the vision?
So the question is, how do we inspire people to get that spirit for ecumenical work, Christian unity work, when in fact the kind of interreligious work of encountering other religions seems to attract more attention? So I think that's the question, right? Does anyone?
Or just examples you've seen in the parish or when people get this far.
I think I could say something, and it has to do with, again, back to the Orientali Lumen Conference that you're familiar with, Larry. One of the reasons that I think that was so popular with our people, who are the Greek Catholics, is because we live in a world that we are the wound, we are the scab on the wound of Christianity, of Catholic Orthodox relations. Because we recognize that that the churches are not where they need to be, and if either one of them thinks they can live without the other, they're wrong. And so as the Greek Catholic Church, which entered into communion for all kinds of political reasons and even theological reasons and what have you, but which was the uniatism was a means of bringing about church unity that was condemned in the agreed statement of Balamand in 1993. Our bishops in Romania, however, got a Bowdlerized copy of that thing and of that statement, and wrote an open letter in their publication to the Holy Father rejecting that conclusion. And I'm sitting here thinking, in the United States, we know that we are not what we are supposed to be, not Catholic enough for Catholics, not Orthodox enough for Orthodox. What do we do, and what do they do? Because they had just emerged from being illegal in Romania, being in the catacombs. Okay. We are still trying to find our way. We are still in our own way, and from the pew level on up, trying to work out the differences and work away from the differences in Catholicism and Orthodoxy specifically. But what does that have to do with us here? Just when you thought uniatism was dead, pardon me, I don't mean to be offending anyone, but then we get Anglicanorum Coetibus. Yeah. And for whatever reasons, good, bad, or indifferent, there are many Anglicans now who are part of the Catholic communion because they chose that as opposed to working out differences in their own communion. Well, I can bring a sort of sensitivity to these guys about that, because that's been our experience in my church for 300 years. Not where we need to be, not where God wants us to be, but being there to remind our larger brothers and sisters that there's work to be done here. And we, in the case of this conference, it happens, like I said, from the pew level on up. So our people are interested. Our people are interested. So how do you take that and put that in another context? I don't know.
Here in the last minute of our discussion, Bishop John, did you want to?
Well, I was just going to say, in all due deference to interreligious dialogue, which is, crucially important, for catching the spark, Jesus' prayer that they all be one. I mean, that's an incredible challenge and ought to spark the Christian imagination.
Yes. And as you referenced, so many families are already living the relationship of the churches, but with different members of the church and different churches. So, but what's come up now in this last 30 seconds of our time, rather complicated idea about identity and faith. And we have a war in Ukraine that involves the Orthodox Church and splitting it apart. And Eastern Catholics are there too in Ukraine. And we have South Sudan, where we have an example in a church in duress, where the Anglicans and Catholics are living as one church. And it has a lot to do with South Sudanese identity, I think, in terms of who they are as South Sudanese. It leaves us with this big question that we could not begin to address, but it shows you, I think, the significance of the role of ecumenism and maybe something of a spark. We have a reception set up across the quadrangle, second floor, Healy Hall. And as you enter it, to the left is closer to the stairs. And you all are welcome. There are refreshments there, an opportunity to chat further with our guests. I want us to thank these 5 bishops for coming and their 3 staff for joining us. For praying with us during the week, liturgy and Vesper service, and for wanting to move forward, making some decisions, I understand, to move IARCM forward in a new and powerful direction. So thank you again, everyone.